So and we can turn it back on when we're done, but that did it right there.
Little dark sun.
All right, everyone, we're going to get the show on the road here. Feel free to take a seat, or if you want to stay standing, that's fine. It's up to you. There'll be plenty of time to look at the boards in the back after the presentation if you want to spend more time with them. Okay, let's get started. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who know me, I promise I won't sing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dwayne Martin. I'm the Director of Community Development for the town of West Hartford. No sound. Maybe if I hold it closer. Can you hear me now? There we go. All right, let's start over. I won't do the stupid joke. My name is Dwayne Martin. I'm the Director of Community Development for the town of West Hartford. Welcome. Thank you all for coming to our second public workshop for our West Hartford Center Infrastructure Master Plan. So tonight we have our consultant, Stan Tech, who's standing to the right of me. They are going to do a presentation for you, PowerPoint, and then as you probably saw, there's boards in the back that everybody can take a look at, some of which you'll be seeing in the presentation, but we welcome your input and feedback with, placing comments and stickers and so on and so forth there. We will be going through a lot of information, so if you guys have to leave early, we will be putting the presentation on the town's website, so you'll be able to get that information there as well. And there'll be plenty of time after the presentation for questions. Both Stan Tech and some of the town staff will be in the back of the room as you look at the boards and available to answer any of your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Travis from Stan Tech. Thank you.
Thanks, Dwayne. Just some quick introductions for our staff. My name is Travis Ewan. I'm a landscape architect. I'm also the project manager. To my right is Liza Cohen, who is a transportation planner, and Jason Schreiber, a senior planner with us. So as Dwayne said, we have a lot of material to get through. The last time we met was in September, where we met all of you in this room as well as out on LaSalle Street, the corner of LaSalle and Farmington, where we had a pop-up tent. And we're going to go through a variety of things. We're going to go through the project process to date, our design goals, vehicular and bicycle circulation. We know how important that is. Ideas about the public realm, some conceptual ideas we're looking for your feedback. So once this presentation is over, we'll meet you in the back of the room to discuss them, and then we'll go through next steps. So really this is a comprehensive infrastructure master plan. So we're looking from, I'll go right to the plan here, from Trout Brook Drive to Woodrow Street, from Burr all the way to Brace Road and everything in between at a very high level, where we're looking at street trees, bike ped facilities, things of that nature. And then we're moving into a construction project for LaSalle and Farmington. And so on our schedule, we met with you in September, and right now we are here in February. So after this, we're going to be kicking off preliminary design for LaSalle and Farmington and taking your input and putting it into the final infrastructure master plan. With that, I'll pass it off to Liza.
All right, thank you so much for coming this evening, everyone. So, I feel funny holding this mic. So we were here in September, as Travis mentioned. We had a pop-up at the corner of LaSalle and Farmington, and we were here in this room. We got a lot of great feedback from people, so I'm just going to review some of what we heard. So some of the key ideas were thinking about how to make it more comfortable to walk and bike in the town center. Also some concerns about safety in general, as well as traffic congestion and managing traffic speeds. So specifically regarding LaSalle, sorry, I skipped one. Yeah. So specifically regarding LaSalle, we heard a lot of conflicting things. So those being, we should close it, we should make it fully pedestrian, we should keep it one way, it's great the way it is, or we should return it to two-way traffic flow. So lots of different, contradictory opinions as to why each of those was the most important to focus on. Similarly, we heard about, this is what I was mentioning earlier, the walking environment and the bicycling environment. And once again, there were some contradictions in the feedback and suggestions that we got. So for biking, we heard, protected bike lanes on Farmington, that should be a key link. And I don't want to see a bicycle anywhere near Farmington. That's not a safe link for people on bikes. We heard about a desire for improved bicycle connections along LaSalle for a north-south connection, as well as improved bicycle connections along Main Street for a north-south connection. So you see there are, again, differing opinions here on the bicycle network. And again, we heard about excessive traffic and speeding and a desire to mitigate that in some way, as well as a desire for more open space to rest and interact, more benches to sit on. So we'll talk about that as we move through some of our ideas. So I want to quickly walk through the goals that we set out with as we began this project. You as a community have come together over the past 4 or 5 years, specifically through the town center planning process, as well as the plan, the Plan of Conservation and Development, sorry, I get it wrong every time. And together you've all developed these goals. So we took these kind of high-level planning goals that are meant to apply to land use, to zoning, to open space, to mobility throughout West Hartford, and tried to understand what those would mean for street design in West Hartford Center. We also asked folks to rank those goals. So at the last public workshop, people had an opportunity to do so, as well as online after the public workshop. And interestingly, the goals that rose to the top were, and I'll go through, kind of what each of these means, but facilities and infrastructure, economic development, focusing on neighborhoods and housing for all, and then finally open space and environment. So just an interesting look at what priorities are when thinking about the town center. So what do each of these mean for street design? So to us, facilities and infrastructure, you can see some of the text from the goal up here in the bullet points, but to us what this means when we think about operationalizing it into street design, it means thinking about planning for the future, thinking about electric vehicle charging and information and communication being built right into the street so you can do things like real-time parking availability, real-time transit availability, and much more. It means thinking about also improving the technology that we use for plantings and tree support. That has come a long way recently, and Travis will talk a bit more about that. For economic development, to us, what that means is using street design to promote commerce, to create space for outdoor dining, as well as to make sure that we're protecting local neighborhoods from traffic, maintaining the character of what makes West Hartford great. For neighborhoods and housing, again, this goal was interestingly focused on creating housing for all ages. So to us, what that means is streets that are accessible to people with all different types of mobility needs, as well as interactive spaces and streets that support walking and housing downtown, so folks who live downtown can also walk to destinations downtown. For transportation, this goal is great. It sort of hits on all the elements that we like to think of when we think of transportation in the future. But to us, what this goal means in terms of facilities on the street is planning for new transportation technology, planning for what's called an 8 to 80 bicycle facility, so a bicycle facility that an 80-year-old would feel comfortable using and a bicycle facility that an 8-year-old would feel comfortable using. And if you can plan for those two users, you can plan for all users to be comfortable. Thinking about bus amenities, what do we have for transit users? You guys actually have relatively frequent transit service through the town center, so are we capitalizing on that? And of course, thinking about, most importantly, prioritizing safety and walkability, and getting around on 2 feet or rolling or however it is. Open space and environment, this is a really important goal, particularly when it comes to stormwater management and planning for the future. So on the street, that means space for bioswales that can help process stormwater and green infrastructure. It means, as I mentioned earlier, infrastructure to support healthy tree growth and a good tree canopy, which provides shade, and thinking about opportunities for pocket parks, where can we squeeze in a little additional green space along the way. Your land use goal is very smart growth oriented, so trying to think about density and walkability. And to us, that just really translates again to being able to walk to multiple destinations comfortably and directly, not having to walk around a giant super block kind of thing. Cultural and historic resources. In the downtown, you have some great historic resources, so trying to think about integrating those into the street design as well as making them accessible to folks who are walking around West Hartford Center. So today it's a bit challenging to get to Unity Green, for example. How can we better integrate that into the town center? And so I think with that, those are all of the goals that we kind of had as our canvas as we set out to develop our designs. And so now Jason is going to talk a little bit about some of the technical analysis that we've done.
Thank you, Liza. So we're starting with vehicles because that's sort of, thank you, like the thing that everybody's always worried about. It's the number one concern that comes up in the transportation planning and engineering trade. But frankly, it's changed a lot over the last 10 years. And over the course of the last 20 years, we've been much more focused on other modes of transportation, but recently it's all about safety. And it's all about making it work for all modes as safely as possible. And so I start, when I want to talk about cars, with the problems that cars and others are facing, and this is crashes. And as you know, there's been a recent history that's not good in West Hartford of crashes that are both fatal and injury related, even to the point of hopping a sidewalk. But one of the things that's really important, this is a heat map of where crashes are. You can see, obviously, like the major intersections of Main and Farmington, and along them are where you see those repeated crashes. Many of those are pedestrian and bicycle. And in every single one of those locations, we know the problem. It's that the intersections are too big. So all those little dots are the lengths of the crossings. And even where you may have a median breaking it up, say the north side of Farmington when you try to cross Main, it's still a lot of distance, over 100 feet from one side to the other. And so we look at any gap that really breaks a good 20, 30-foot crossing as a threat. And you've only got a few of those in green. Yellow gets to be a concern. And all those large intersections directly correlate to those crashes. And that's something that we know we need to sort of re-engineer and think about what's going on. So we did get lots of great count data from the town. We went ahead and did some other supplemental counts to sort of calibrate, get the worst case condition of traffic. And you're sort of looking at a summary of some of the results. And in that purple line, for instance, up and down, this is a PM peak hour of traffic for cars. And there's 1,500 cars just in the single peak hour, between like 5 and 6, maybe 4:30 and 5:30 every evening going through traffic, particularly at these peak hours. So while it's nice to have through traffic potentially for customers, literally most of them are just driving through. And one thing you all need to decide, and is influencing our design, is how much should we care about letting people from out of town blow through? Now, admittedly, some of them may be residents just trying to get home from Hartford, and they come through on Farmington. But in the town center, is it appropriate that we have roadways that are focused heavily on this movement, or should we be thinking about them a little bit more as a place? And so there's also things about place that are important. There are employees coming in and out. That's probably the second greatest amount of traffic pattern that we've seen circling around. You actually see this funny little circle coming out of the town center garage and looping around all the way down to Ellsworth and up LaSalle. That's actually because they can't go through on Memorial to get to the west, and they don't like to turn left and left through Farmington. So that's something we've thought about, is like, how can we connect Memorial maybe to relieve that pressure, though it's only on Ellsworth, but it's something to think about. But then the other big and often most publicly perceived traffic circulation is actually hunting for parking. And regardless of where you're going, that big central block, this whole area here is actually more or less a super block. You can't drive through. You can sort of cut through a parking lot. And that means there's a lot of circulation hitting all those intersections out there when people try to find parking. Now, they may come around on Brace, and they may go past because they can't turn down LaSalle now to hunt for parking. There's a variety of those moves that we saw. And the parking hunt in particular is interesting because right now we all know that's important for businesses and it's important for the vitality, and it's important for residents to be able to get downtown. But there's actually a lot of parking. So they're hunting for something. And they're usually hunting for a convenient on-street space, because if I were to summarize that detailed inventory map, this is sort of the block-by-block summary, there's a lot of parking. Like, combined in this whole study area, there's over 5,000 parking spaces, and it's actually well divided. Those garages over in Blueback Square make you think there's more there. Actually, Town Center Garage and the lots over by Town Center actually have a pretty good amount over here on this half too, and it's actually really well located. So parking is in a good spot, off-street in particular. When people think about parking and they think about access, they also think about what they pay. And when I look at the prices for all of these things, they're actually sort of flat. And that's one of the problems that we've determined is this is a heat map of utilization of all those different places to park. And where it's orange, it's really heavily utilized, but where it's blue, it's not as well utilized. And you'll see the garages in the center of the blocks have those blues. And I'll summarize it for you here a little bit more cleanly. In the middle of the day, this is data from back in 2019 when we were really robust and busy for parking. We're probably close to that again now. You can see, you know, Farmington Avenue gets pretty busy. The Blueback Square on-street area gets a little bit. LaSalle's not quite there, but notice the garages. So the garages in the middle of the day are really not being heavily used at all. Your problem is at night, right? The streets are filled up. Look at all that orange. All of a sudden, all those streets, you can't find parking almost anywhere. But man, look at all the empty spaces. There's no less than 1,500 empty spaces in downtown West Hartford. So everybody's running around, driving on your streets, looking for parking because they want the front door space. My goodness, can't we just make it easier to find a garage space? Can't we, through maybe an infrastructure master plan, make it easier to just want to walk to a garage, make it more visible? And maybe we as planners say, maybe we should rethink that pricing, and instead of just having a flat rate, maybe we change it so it's a little bit more expensive on those streets and actually really cheap in some of those garages. Tiered pricing, it's a very strong best practice, and in most communities it creates the availability that folks want and actually encourages more people to come into your downtown. Now, that's a big circulation issue. The other big circulation issue, back to Liza's earlier point, is all about one-way, two-way closure on LaSalle. So using all those traffic numbers, I'm going to sort of summarize what we understood when we began to model what might happen. So this is a scenario. Red arrows are showing where cars would shift to. Gray arrows are showing where cars would shift away if we were to reintroduce two-way on LaSalle, and we even explored in this scenario two-way on Memorial. So basically it's saying everything can open up and people can go how they want. Well, guess what? Suddenly a lot of cars would suddenly be able to go southbound on LaSalle, and that would take actually a lot of pressure off of a street like Woodrow, for instance. Opening up a two-way Memorial, particularly in this direction, all those people who I showed you earlier who loop around and kind of get around, they might actually shoot out backwards on Woodrow. Probably not as many as are heading southbound, we don't think, but that might happen if we open up a full two-way Memorial. So it's something to think about, but the two-way LaSalle seems to make sense. If we only did the one-way, which is another option, it's something we're thinking about, makes a lot of sense, and we're suggesting this to the town that we like this option maybe the best. There might be some people who come across, but that volume is really no different than exists today for the most part. And so you'd be able to pull a lot of the pressure with a two-way LaSalle off of Woodrow. We also looked at closing LaSalle. A lot of people mentioned this. And to be clear, I think when you have special events, when you have things going on LaSalle, particularly on weekends, it's an excellent street for doing that. And you'll see as we get into the design, we've actually made it even easier and better to do that. But if you were to do it in this PM peak hour of traffic, the impact on other streets, particularly a street like Woodrow, would really be significant because people just can't get through. There's just not enough breaks in that even big super block, even if I opened up Memorial, it's just going to be really impactful. The other reason why we know that closing off LaSalle all the time is problematic is that in about 90% of the attempted pedestrian mall street closures in America over the last 40 years, they failed. There's very few that were kept in place. So many were removed. And many of them have transitioned to temporary, and that's a good solution. But we know that if you take a lot of cars off the street, you take a lot of eyes off the street, and you take a lot of activity off the street. It doesn't mean everybody should be driving, for sure. We want them more to walk. But this is still America. There's still a point where people arrive by car. Until you have all sorts of light rail and lots of bike facilities and everything coming into here, and we're about to talk about bike facilities, we should probably not think about closing it down entirely, but we may want to think about closing it down periodically, even weekly. So in summary, what we're seeing today is a one-way northbound LaSalle and these two little broken up two-way sections of Memorial. And by the way, the Farmington lot with the one-way in off of Farmington and exiting on Main. We see all of these as problematic. And so that analysis suggests to us that instead, LaSalle becomes a two-way street is what we're recommending. We at least have one way all the way through on Memorial, and we actually flip the entry and exits for the Farmington lot and make make Main Street a new entrance to that main lot. It's actually a really good way of making it safer for crossing that sidewalk where we've had a lot of complaints. And as you'll see, there's some concepts for actually making that a nice gateway. And exiting here is very easy because there's already a signal. So we think we may want to make that switch relatively soon. So as I mentioned, bicycling is another great opportunity. Liza.
So we took a look at the existing bicycle network in the town center, which you can see on this map shown in green, is relatively disjointed today. So you have bike lanes on LaSalle, you have sharrows on South Main where there's a painted bike with two arrows in front of it in the lane, and it means that bicyclists are meant to share the lane with people driving. But as far as trying to connect to anywhere, there aren't a lot of options. So we did a really rough, what's called bicycle comfort analysis, where you essentially look at how many lanes, how much traffic, how protected is the bicycle facility. And this map shows the rating of the different roadways throughout the town center. So you can see, there's not a lot of really safe feeling east-west connections. Right now, Memorial, which doesn't even technically go through, is kind of your best bet if you want to travel east-west through the town center. We also took a look at, you have on the books a bicycle facilities plan. I believe there's a plan to update that in the future. But that plan at the moment recommends that Boulevard be the east-west connection. So what did we hear from folks? Again, we heard a lot of conflicting ideas and some really good ideas. But interest in overall being able to get both to and through the town center. And also once you get there, have a place to park your bike that's secure and comfortable and meets all the standards. So what we would propose is that Farmington become that east-west link. LaSalle can become a slow street where people biking, people driving, people walking can all kind of share the road together and feel safe. And then ultimately, we want to take a closer look at South Main Street and what that looks like in terms of bicycle connectivity. But these are the two main connections that we're recommending today. Interestingly, on its edges, Farmington Avenue already has bicycle connections. So over in Hartford, they have painted bike lanes, one on each side. And similarly, down by Wardwell Road, there are painted bike lanes, one on each side. So we want to think about not only connecting to and through the center, but where are you connecting from? So we looked at a few different options for type of bicycle facility, and this is ultimately the one that we're going with. Each option has pros and cons associated with it. So this type of bicycle facility is actually at sidewalk level, if you can see in these images. So you're biking at the same level as people walking, so it takes people on bikes out of the street and away from fast-moving, giant ton vehicles. And it's integrated into the sidewalk infrastructure. So the challenge with these is maintenance a little bit, although we've been talking with the town and they feel they could maintain a facility like this, as well as just making sure that we're delineating the different spaces so that people walking are aware that there's going to be people moving more quickly on bikes. We looked at street level cycle tracks, and these are typically actually deployed in more of a retrofit condition. So we have a street, we don't have a lot of money, we want to create a safe bicycle route, and in this case you're doing a full reconstruction, so we thought you had an opportunity to make a more premium facility, but we did want to take a look at this. The challenge with these, of course, is plowing them. You have to get a little tiny plow that can fit in there. It's doable, but that can be an issue, as well as figuring out the separation and how that works at intersections. And then finally, there's an option which is a Copenhagen-style bicycle facility. So that's where you have your sidewalk level, you have your street level, and kind of halfway between the two, you have your bicycle level. So this, again, challenges include maintaining it because you'd have to look at snow plowing and sort of clearance and keeping it clean. The advantage of this is that you don't need as much of a buffer between all, people walking, people biking, and people driving because the level change provides that buffer to some extent. We also did look at what is called a two-way cycle track. So that's where you have bicycles moving in both directions on the same side of the street. And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, Farmington Avenue on the east and the west, there's bicycle lanes on both sides. So if you were to transition from a facility like this to a facility like that, that can get pretty complicated in terms of what happens at intersections and that sort of thing. So we ultimately put this to the side, but we did consider it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Travis, who's going to talk a bit about walkability in public realm.
All right, so we're going to start off with one of the most defining features, or at least from my perspective as a landscape architect, is the trees in the town center. They're a defining element, but they're experiencing some decline based on the amount of soil volume that's in their tree pits, as well as it being a monoculture of tree types. So it's a Gladitsia triacanthos, which is a honey locust. And so if you look here at some of the percentages, there's out of the 98 trees that were studied back in December by Bartlett tree experts, 83 of those are honey locusts. So they're a very high valued element in the public realm in that they mitigate heat island effect, they filter stormwater. So as we progress in this, we're looking towards what we can do to mitigate any potential loss of these trees in the future. So just some imagery of the existing conditions in Blueback Square. There's some really healthy trees there, some generous tree pits. There are some trees that are now experiencing endemic diseases that will have to be dealt with as time allows. And then in the town center, you can see here where some of the honey locusts are experiencing infection from fungus. They're also experiencing damage to the root system. So, and where they've really maxed out their tree pits. So the way to grow big trees, and we'll touch on that, is to have soil volume. And this slide is showing that. So there's now the old style of street tree planting is you dig a hole and you plop the tree in a 5x5 pit. But unfortunately, that's just not enough soil to sustain a tree for a long period of time. So what we're looking at here is a new technology, which is called a soil cell system, which suspends the surrounding pavement and allows you to achieve huge soil volume amounts, which allows the trees to reach their the full potential and live a healthy life. And one thing that a key element that we're looking at is native trees native to Connecticut. We're seeing lots of bird die-offs, and that has to do with insects being lost. And so we're looking at tree species that encourage beneficial insects that will promote bird life along those lines, and trees that can tolerate the urban condition, whether that's salt tolerance, drought tolerance, and things of that nature. And again, we're going to be thinking about green infrastructure, and so what are the appropriate plants there at the ground level that will encourage pollinators such as bees and butterflies. And then looking at the kind of the public realm from the hardscape perspective. So whether that's the pavement, we know that there are a lot of upgrades and potential upgrades to happen. Blueback Square, which was built not so long ago, and then looking at Town Center and the potential for some dramatic upgrades. And so just to touch quickly on this, the lighting in Blueback Square, it's regularly spaced. Same thing within the Town Center. There's a general lack of seating in the Town Center for the public, so as you walk along along LaSalle and Farmington, there is not a lot of benches, whereas Blueback Square has a lot of those streetscape amenities. With that, I'll pass it off to Liza.
Yeah, so quickly, we did a comprehensive review, as Travis was mentioning, of where are their benches, where are their planters, where is their wayfinding signage. And that's generally what all these little dots on the map are. So you can see there's a big gap along Farmington Avenue and along LaSalle Road. And so both of those present an opportunity to us to integrate more of these streetscape elements into the design. The other place that there's a gap is between Town Center and Blueback Square. And at the last meeting, a lot of you all talked about the desire to kind of better connect those two and have it really all feel like one town center. So we also think that, this is an opportunity and something that we should be looking at as we think about the overall town center. We also did a review of walkability, as Jason was mentioning. So we looked at crosswalk length, but we also looked at where are there crosswalks and what do they look like? What type of crosswalk are they? What type of crossing opportunity do they afford? And today you have a variety of crosswalks. You have some that are really nice, high visibility crosswalks painted onto the ground. And then you have some that perhaps have seen better days and it's time for an upgrade. So we're trying to look at every intersection and opportunities to create more crossings. And of course, there are places where today there's actually no opportunity to cross. So for example, along Brace Road, if you live in the neighborhood north of Brace Road, what the built environment is telling you today is you can't cross the street and come down into the town center. So we want to look at gaps like that and think about how we can encourage walkability not only within the town center, but from the neighborhoods that surround it. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to Travis, who's going to talk a little bit about streetscape, right? Yeah. Oh, I go into these first. Sorry. So we have the overall master plan, so looking at the overall study area. And then as Travis mentioned at the beginning, one of our focus areas is actual construction documents for LaSalle Road and Farmington Avenue. And so tonight we have a couple of proposals for those designs. You can see those at the back, and Travis is going to walk through them. But I wanted to mention first that at the first public meeting, we asked, what's most important to you in terms of what we do with the street space? Dedicated outdoor dining, widening the sidewalks, providing bicycle facilities, or providing angled on-street parking. And interestingly, the responses here, which red is the first choice, dark blue is last choice, if you look at Farmington Avenue, look different from LaSalle Road. So Farmington Avenue, for both, we have folks prioritizing outdoor dining and walkable space, but Farmington Avenue, folks felt less attached to the angled on-street parking and thought that providing bicycle facilities was more important. And on LaSalle Road, those two flip-flopped. So we took that into consideration as we were developing these designs. So now with that, I will hand it off to Travis to talk a bit about the two roadway designs.
Yes, and so just touching on a few of the design goals here is really to create a gateway to town center, provide a safe and comfortable walking environment, improve economic development. It's already very robust, but whatever we can do to improve it, and really enhance the streetscape character and a lot of the other things that Jason and Liza just touched on. So this is the existing cross-section, and the one thing that will stand out to you is the amount of roadway dedicated to vehicles versus pedestrians. So what stood out to us is how can we repurpose some of this roadway and create pedestrian and bike space. So looking at from the center line of the road, how we can repurpose the roadway. So in here we're extending the curb outwards towards the center line of the road. We're providing buffer space for this new cycle track on either side of Farmington. And then a furniture zone, which would include street tree planting, lighting, benches, amenities of that sort. And then improving the amount of clear walkway space considerably. And then looking at, from a 3D perspective point of view, what we're showing in green is really just a diagrammatic tool to help us communicate where the bike lanes would occur. But you can see how that bike lane would be against the curb, where there would be a 2-foot, 3-foot buffer zone, so when car doors are open, nobody on a bike gets car doored, God forbid. And then in red, in this brick strip here, there would be street tree planting, lighting, benches, things of that sort. And then we would have the dining amenity zones on the other side of that, hugging the buildings. And then at the ground level, this is what it would look like. So you can see the amenity zone there with people having lunch, dinner, whatever. And then the streetscape amenity zone, which would be benches, bike racks, lighting, and street trees. Again, just another view there, looking down.
Similarly, just wanted to remind folks, so for Farmington Avenue, we had prioritizing of outdoor dining and widening the sidewalk space, and then the bicycle connection. And for LaSalle, those two flip-flops. So with that in mind, we created our LaSalle Road design. So I hand it back to you, sorry.
And so on LaSalle Road, what we've heard from folks was creating a destination street and really enhancing the streetscape character, creating a walkable environment. And so, again, looking at the center line of LaSalle, we have a 70-foot curb-to-curb dimension, so that's even wider than Farmington. So quite a bit of roadway dedicated to vehicles. And in the new concept idea at this point is reducing those travel lanes to 10 feet, providing on-street parking still, 8-foot parallel parking lanes. And then again, having this more ample furniture zone at 8 feet. And then we've gone back and forth between proposing a dining amenity zone outside of the right-of-way line, so within the public realm, and then a 10-foot clear walkway. And then in option 2, this is really anchoring the dining zone to the building. So it's really something for us to have a discussion about tonight. And looking at these ideas in 3 dimensions, so this is looking southeast on LaSalle, and the dining zone is within the public right-of-way, so it's separated from the building, and it allows a nice, clear sidewalk space. This is what it would look at the ground level, so really activated. There's still zones for furnishings, bike racks, benches of that sort, and it allows customers and retail to still happen continuously along the building facade. And then the alternative to that is to anchor the dining amenity zone to the buildings. And this is what it would look at the ground level. So really kind of similar to what it is today, and but really extending and making that sidewalk much wider and creating really more of a public amenity. And then another option that we have and we're ruminating on for LaSalle is creating a curbless street. So we know we've heard from folks about wanting to fully shut down LaSalle, but we think this could be a really interesting option for these kind of temporary festival events that might happen, where it creates a more fluid cross pedestrian access across LaSalle.
So we're also thinking about the overall town center study area. So as I mentioned earlier, we did an inventory of where there are existing crossings today. And what we'd propose for the future is that each and every one of these be considered for curb extensions, for an improved crosswalk, for narrowing down the intersection and just simply making it easy to get across. And then of course adding some additional locations, as I mentioned, that are missing today that are sort of preventing folks from walking to the town center. We looked at where there are loading zones. That's going to be very important moving forward in the future, loading of both people and goods, right? So Uber, Lyft, where are those folks dropping off, as well as big trucks where they're making their deliveries. So today those loading zones are relatively limited. We would recommend that those be better dispersed throughout the town center. One loading zone for a rideshare space can, serve up to 20 people an hour instead of one car sitting there for a whole hour empty. So we think that's a really productive use of that front door curb space. Another thing that we took a look at is the type of bicycle rack that's available and whether that's meeting standards in terms of being able to secure your bicycle and actually access the bicycle rack without damaging your bicycle frame. And what we would recommend is looking at 3 types of bicycle racks throughout the town center. So creating secure bicycle parking for longer term folks or folks who, are concerned about their bike. If e-bikes are getting more popular, those are relatively expensive. So having a secure place to lock those up could be really nice. So thinking about some locations for more of that long-term parking, as well as locations for higher capacity bicycle corrals that can take a whole bunch of bikes all together in a pretty confined space. We looked at existing green space today. We know that that's relatively limited. So looking for additional opportunities to integrate what are called pocket parks, so little mini green spaces, places to rest, as well as public art. And what's nice about thinking about public art is it also contributes to creating some gateways to the town center so that as people walk, bike, drive, come in on transit, they're aware that they're arriving somewhere. Something is happening here. So thinking about locations for these. And speaking of transit, as I mentioned earlier, you have relatively frequent transit, particularly east-west here, and Farmington Avenue to the west of South Main Street has been identified as sort of a high transit capacity corridor. So CRCOG, which is the local metropolitan planning organization, actually did a study where they recommended eliminating some of the stops along Farmington, which can make the bus run more quickly if it doesn't have to stop every block, and upgrading those stops to have real-time availability, comfortable place to wait, making sure they have a trash receptacle, kind of everything that somebody riding a bus could need. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to talk about some of these principles at other intersections.
And yes, we are almost done. So these are strictly conceptual ideas. They may look pretty drawn up, but we can do that relatively fast. And we're at that early ideation stage. And we look at that overall master plan area. There's some locations that are not specifically on LaSalle and Farmington that we need to think a little bit creatively about in the future. So we'll come up with a master plan that may suggest some of these. And after we're done, we want you to actually look at these in the back after I explain them, as well as the cross sections that Travis talked you through and many of the other public realm items. But this location in particular keeps coming up because it is such a big intersection. It is where you have the worst crashes. It is where you have the longest crosswalks. And it really should be a better place. It really should be a gateway. So this is parks and may be able to still have a smaller kind of carriageway type road for the businesses that currently front on a southbound one-way flume. They could actually maybe have a one or even two-way street right in front of those businesses. This is a operation that can work well. It's still going to have similar kind of maybe delays, but honestly the delays at this intersection are not that high. So it's something we think can work quite successfully. And maybe, as we'll talk in a little bit, we can see those roads dieted or even narrowed a little bit. We'll get to that in a minute. This is suggesting narrowing those roads, and you absolutely can, because with a roundabout, or in this case a peanut about, you can continue to keep cars moving more or less constantly. And if you haven't been through a modern urban roundabout, which is styled after, they actually do handle cars extremely well, and they handle a good amount of them. We still have to work through the engineering, making sure all the trucks can get through, but basically the idea here is we can keep all of the other existing roads operating, dieted somewhat, the southbound one way along the businesses along Main. That's why it becomes a peanut, so you can get to that leg of it. Now, we don't need a peanut if we then say all the southbound traffic can be on the other side of Unity Green. And that makes it a more standard circular roundabout, maybe not as creative nor as significant a gateway, but potentially a little bit easier to understand. In theory, the navigation is still just following the lines, but I understand if the other one looked confusing. But we might even be able to think about that leg of Main actually servicing as the parking for those businesses. It would be across Unity Green. Maybe that's a little far from them, but suddenly being able to have that different kind of presence and attaching Unity Green directly to the sidewalk to those businesses, you could almost see it being more of an outdoor dining plaza area. It could be really neat. So we want you to kind of look at all of those in a few minutes. Another thing is about the green itself. So this is trying to say, if we were to reconceptualize, as I've already hinted, with all the traffic on one side, what would the green look like, and what can that possibly do? Now, ignore the intersection on the right. That would be where we'd put in all those different options depending on what you liked. Note that we're adding the intersection on the left. That's the sort of the new gateway, the new entrance to the town center lot. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of move the crosswalks over that come out from Blueback, attach them a little bit more directly to the library on an axis that kind of makes it easier to actually get to those shops. But importantly, we can get cars in and out of there at the same time. This is very conceptual. If in the future it doesn't really need to be, which is what we're suggesting, a 5-lane roadway, but can easily be dieted to a 3-lane roadway, which is exactly what you've done just north of here on Main north of Farmington. There's every traffic engineering number support for continuing that all the way down to at least Broadway. There's just not enough cars to warrant 5 lanes. And if you were to really say, hey, this is our community, you can see it reduced in width like that, which actually makes Unity Green just as big as it is today, maybe trimmed a bit on its eastern edge, but we've actually added just as much parking as exists today in parallel parking lanes there indicated in blue. Now, we could still keep a carriageway in front of those businesses if they didn't like the walk. That would narrow Unity Green a little bit. These are all thoughts and considerations when you go back to the boards. We could also do everything we just talked about, but flip it to the other side. A narrowed, again, 3-lane roadway with turn pockets to be able to make the moves, but right up against the businesses, maybe with parking on Unity Green. What this actually does is make Unity Green space even bigger, because the green spaces that are in front of the church and the library are really kind of set back and inactive. And we didn't want to draw anything on here, but what this space could become in terms of a real substantial common is quite notable. So all those options are on the back. Really briefly, 2 other intersections I'll talk you through. Because we know that we can drop Farmington from 5 lanes to 3, we're not necessarily going to push it that far for Trout Brook, because that does have pretty substantial volumes on it, but you can imagine this intersection even being easier to cross, because Farmington doesn't need all that width. So we can get nice crosswalks, we can put in that continued bicycle facility, and it can be in paint for now, is what the town has done to the east of here and further to the west, but you can even envision those cycle tracks on Farmington in our core design area, continuing all the way east here to Trout Brook. And now, lastly, I'm going to talk quickly about Memorial at South Main, a little bit further south. And this is another one of those locations where we're like, wow, if you really look at what's happening from a traffic circulation perspective, there's a lot of lanes. You can actually really, really reduce the size of this intersection, handle all of that volume. And ironically, when I have a small intersection box like that, I can process many cars on every signal, almost as many as you would with a large intersection, because it doesn't take you that long to get across the intersection. I don't need to build in all this safety guidance, extra long yellows, a delay until the next green comes up, and more importantly, the pedestrian crossings become demonstrably shorter. Just look at the distance of these crosswalks versus these crosswalks. So therefore, you can get across more quickly. The whole intersection can operate more efficiently. We can obviously maybe see north-south cycle tracks in the future along Main Street, as is suggested here as well. And it again becomes a really great gateway point. And if we do have better connections on Memorial, you know, people will know that this is a great way to get to Blueback or to Town Center. There's a lot of infrastructure to consider. This is for you to close out.
This is the fun stuff, but when we're thinking about bringing streetscape amenities to the town center, we want to think of them as a family. So what we're offering here is some different ideas, whether it's kind of taking a contemporary approach, stylistically, classic, modern, or so it's really for you to give us feedback on in the back here. So I won't spend too much time on it, only to note that, you know, we're thinking about these things holistically. And the same goes with pavement surfaces. We want to create streetscapes that are ADA accessible, that have the opportunity to have infiltrate stormwater, whether that's through porous pavement or green infrastructure, and really creating these safe bicycle facilities. And then that's for Liza.
All right, almost done. Hooray. So next steps for us, we are moving into preliminary design for LaSalle and Farmington and hoping to incorporate a lot of the great feedback that we hear this evening, as well as starting to develop the infrastructure master plan beyond some of the concepts that you see here. We do have everything online. Tonight's presentation has been recorded and that will be posted online, so folks who couldn't make it tonight will have an opportunity to take a look at that and submit questions. And I'll leave this up if folks want to take down the website. It's also on the flyers that are at various tables here. So this evening, once I am done talking, we found that these sessions work best when we're able to really talk in small groups and point at things and look at boards, as well as get your feedback written down on those boards. So we'd like to invite you to join the three of us, as well as there are some folks from the town floating around, to give us your feedback on many of the things that you've seen this evening. There's some design boards along the back there. The cross sections are over there. Some of the materiality stuff is there, and then there's some other information around the room. So with that, thank you so much again for coming this evening and for paying attention for that long presentation. I really appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing your feedback.
All the boards and the people at the tables and stuff.
When I see you circle.
That's a good presentation.
So have you seen it?
Too shaky?
I would say we'll set it on each board for like 30 seconds and then move to the next one. So people can see.
They didn't. In the presentation, they never said, they never thought it was CEO, they'll probably make me like it all needs to yeah, it wasn't, I think it's it's like kind of bad. I think this doesn't count. It's like its own thing. This is one of the things it looks like there's only one. I don't know. The size of the line, so I like that.